Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the constituents of the Marcos City constituency to make my contribution to the midterm budget communication by the Right Honourable Member for Centreville. Before I do that, Mr. Speaker, let me add my voice of condolences to our Chief Clerk on the passing of his wife. That is always something that we don't want to be remiss in doing. The Chief Clerk obviously serves us with great distinction, and our prayers are with him and his family. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to lend my voice to the comments made yesterday by the Honourable Member for Fort Charlotte in respect of the Honourable Member for South Abaco. Upon coming into this House, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for South Abaco went to great pains and to pull some of the younger members aside in both parties and to give wise counsel on what it means to be in this House. And I am indebted for that. I also remember the wise counsel, surprisingly, from the former Honourable Member, the Honourable former Member for North Abaco, that there are really no friends in politics. That is one of the best counsel I've ever heard about politics, and has become more and more true the longer I've stayed in this House. And so, Mr. Speaker, in making my contribution to this debate, I start with this observation, that really you cannot fault the general public for listening to the debate in this House and for seeing it as political theater. That the contributions that are made by the governing side are the same contributions that were made by the opposite side when they were in government, with a few twists and turns, different projects, different names, and the contributions being made by the opposition are the same contributions that were made by the present governing side when they were in opposition. It's always the same thing. We come into this House and whoever's governing paints a very rosy picture. Everything is going well. All the things make sense. And whoever's in opposition says the opposite, it's going terribly and disaster is at hand. And people were once very satisfied with that, Mr. Speaker. That was very good theater at one time. That was very good entertainment. But all of a sudden it's gotten very serious because people finally understand that politics actually affects their daily lives now. Politics is actually affecting people in their daily lives. And that has made it very serious because while we've been playing this political theater in this House, we've watched over successive governments, all the governments since independence, but certainly in the last 20 years, we've watched increases in unemployment. We've watched increases in the amount of work permits being issued to foreigners to do jobs that Bahamians can do. We've watched increases in crime day in and day out. And we come in this House and wring our hands and shake our heads and do absolutely nothing about it. We watch increases in our deficit on and on and on to the point where we finally have to take a stand, and I'll make some contributions on that in a minute. We've watched increases in prices in the store. We've watched increases in the amount of casual workers being employed with very, very little protection under the law. A practice that was actually spearheaded by the government itself. We've watched increases, Mr. Speaker, in corruption. We've watched increases in taxes. We've seen decreases also. Regrettably, those have been decreases in home ownership in this country, which has directly affected the middle class. We've seen decreases in the amount of good-paying jobs. And we play with the stats on this. We say, oh, unemployment is this and unemployment is that. And we do not make a distinction between those who are employed on the one hand and those who are underemployed. We just say anyone who had a job and got another job has a job. And we don't make the point that people once had good-paying jobs. And now they have jobs where they're just getting by. And although they will be counted as employed for statistical purposes, they are underemployed in our country. We make no distinction about that. We've watched decreases in educational performance in our country, and we seem to have no idea what to do about it. We've watched decreases in the amount of tertiary scholarships available, decreases in jobs, wages, decreases in transparency. And all of this theater has been going on. All that's really changed, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, if you see, and people have intuitively in this country understood this, they just have not been able to articulate it. But if you look at the political parties in this country, you can very easily come to the conclusion that there's just one big bus. And all the top people are on the bus, and the only thing that changes every 5 years is who's driving the bus. But the bus keeps going on that same course, and that course is for the detriment of the people and for the benefit of the established few. And so there's been a general increase in disaffectedness, Mr. Speaker, a general increase in disconnect in our country, a general increase in hopelessness under both governments. And the question is, what do we do about it? That's been actually reflected in the election results for those who want to pay attention. Since 1992, there's one election in 1997 which I believe you have to discount. Because in that election, the governing party, which was then in opposition, the prior governing party, the PLP, had not responded to the cry of the people, had not changed its leadership in 1997. And so to my mind, you have to discount that election because you're not sure whether the people were again voting for the FNM or against the PLP. But short of that election, every single election since 2002 has seen a change of government in this country. Every election. And that has to send a message to the people in this House. That has to send a message to the political directorate. And it has to send a very coherent, very loud message as to the dissatisfaction of the people with the way in which we're governing, if they're changing governments every time they get an opportunity to do so. And there are people who have said, you know, that is bad for democracy, you should not change governments every 5 years, you shouldn't do that, and that absolutely misses the point. It misses the point that the people are clearly saying that they are dissatisfied with politics as usual. That brings me to a point, Mr. Speaker. Some have referred to this idea of a Gussie May cabinet. They've referred to it because they just see it as a numbers game. They don't see it as a response of the government of the day to their perceived need to control the legislature of the day. But we could look a little more deeply at that. The Constitutional Commission did in their report, starting at paragraph 19.3. And they said this: in the Bahamas, where there's a real possibility a cabinet may be composed of all the ministers of the government, and where the majority of the members of parliament may be affiliated with the government in some way or another, either as ministers, junior ministers, parliamentary secretaries, or chairmen of various statutory corporations, the fundamental Westminster concept of a collective responsibility may be completely subverted. That's the point they made. Subverted. In a sense, as was remarked by one contributor, it may be that Parliament is accountable to the government rather than the other way around, government being accountable to Parliament, because of the way in which the cabinet is composed and has been composed over 3 successive governments of this country. In fact, every government since independence. There's no real scope on the part, they say, of the fiercely loyal party caucus in the House to exercise any independence in these matters, as they often look to their colleagues in government, meaning in cabinet, for parliamentary or other appointments. This is a situation that has been described by a distinguished English judge, Lord Helsham, as an elective dictatorship. That's the way they describe it. And they're doing that to say that the size of the cabinet is a threat to the democracy. Representation was also made that there should be limits on the numbers of MPs that might be appointed as parliamentary secretaries and junior ministers. The Commission agrees with that. The tendency to inflate the cabinet with a large number of ministers, which has added to the Bahamian political vernacular the term Gussie May cabinet, was also criticized as an abuse and a practice which undermines accountability. Indeed, it was one of the framers who recommended the Constitution should set a maximum number of ministers, and they proposed a maximum. And they went on to talk about how, in fact, the Constitution, lamentably, does not impose a maximum size for cabinet. Regrettably, it only imposes a minimum size. Cabinet must be at least 9 members of the House. Well, 9 members in total, including the Prime Minister. And the problem with that is that if you take a House like ours, composed of 38 members, and you just do the simple math on it, half of that is 19. You clearly want a cabinet that's 20. So that when you walk into the House, when you misuse this concept of collective responsibility, you walk into the House with a majority of the executive imposing their will on the legislature. That undermines the whole idea of a separation of powers of our government. And that is what we are seeing in our country. And that is not a partisan position. That's a position that every government since independence has taken. And regrettably, it diminishes the value of debate in this House. And that's why I added to the way in which I started. If you have a cabinet that is not a majority of the legislature, you come to the legislature with proposed enactments to implement proposed policies, and you have a proper debate on it, and you come out of here with something that people can all sign on to. But if you come into this House with what you perceive as a majority, and in fact is a majority because you come into the House with a subverted view of collective responsibility, you see the legislature itself as a rubber stamp. And that is not good for the democracy. And so where do you go from there? For the first time in 2017, for the first time we will see in the history of this country since independence a change in the demographics of the voters in this country. For the first time, those people between 18 and 35 will constitute 58% of our electorate. For the first time since independence. And what concerns me about that is that we are seeing these two clash of crucial issues. One, a demographic change in the electorate, and two, a great sense of disconnectedness and hopelessness. And I'm very concerned that that demographic may go in the wrong direction, may do the wrong thing with that vote. And I'm concerned that this House needs to be more responsive in the short term to be able to project that sense of hopefulness and to get things back on the right track. You know, Mr. Speaker, when I think in that line, I think of that biblical verse in Joshua. Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. And the setting is that Moses is dead. People out of Egypt, they spend their time in the wilderness. They've been there for 40 years. They've become a bit accustomed to the wilderness, to be frank.
No more manna from heaven.
And then Moses dies. And God says this. He says, Joshua, my servant Moses is dead. Now come, let us go and cross this Jordan. Let's go into the real promised land. Man. This is not the promised land. Let us go into the real promised land. Let us cross this little Jordan compared to a big Red Sea, which we crossed already, and seem to have forgotten that we were able to cross. Let us cross this little Jordan and go where we're really supposed to be going, not into this wilderness where we're just getting by. Let us go into the promised land where we can prosper. And in a sense, Mr. Speaker, that is my entire contribution. Let us cross this Jordan. Let us move on. And I'll mention a few things, but that's essentially it. I'll mention a few things to emphasize what I'm saying. Let's take VAT, for instance. I clearly voted against VAT. I'm the only member of the governing party that voted against VAT. I have never had anything good to say about VAT. I still don't have anything good to say about VAT. And I'll make it abundantly clear. At the earliest opportunity that I'm able to participate in a program to repeal VAT, I will do so. At the earliest opportunity, not like these jokers are saying they want to frill around the edges of it and take
members. Yes, they got this. We have this. The member retracts. It's withdrawn and expunged from the record.
As the opposition has said, they just want to go around the edges of it and shape it up a little bit. Let me be very, very clear. My position is that it is a bad law, it is an unfair law, it is an inequitable law, and I will do all I can as quickly as I can to contribute as much as I can to repealing that bill. In total. And what is the reason we passed that bill? Both governments ran up the national debt. We may come in this House and claim that the F&M ran up the national debt. They didn't. The PLP and the F&M ran up the national debt from 1973. Ran deficits for every year of independence. Every single year of independence. Well, I hear that. We have run national debts throughout the history of this country. And it is true that the F&M in the last administration accelerated the accumulation of the national debt. Ran up over $1 billion in debt in one administration. And they pushed us about 8 years ahead of the crisis that we were going to be in anyway. And so we got to the point where we needed to pay the debt. We needed to pay the debt because it is the country's debt. It is not the government's debt. It's not the politicians' debt. It is the country's debt. And as a result, we needed to pay it. And here's where we differ, Mr. Speaker. I have never differed on the question that we needed to increase taxes. Ever. We have to have a responsible democracy and we have to pay our way. Where I have differed is where we would raise those taxes. Whom would we impose those taxes upon. And that is where the question of equity or inequity comes in. And that's why I'm so vehemently opposed, not only was opposed to the enactment of VAT, but I'm still opposed to it. We needed to impose some fiscal responsibility, and we then took off the table a tax upon the persons who are most able to afford it in this country. We refused to consider income tax for the wealthy. And having made a decision not to consider that, we then were able to say the only option left is another consumption tax. But we loaded the deck. We refused to consider income tax on the wealthy. We had, and I don't want to call names in the House based on contributions, but we had a member of the government, cabinet minister, make the point in his estimation that 90% of the wealth of the country was reposed in 1% of the people. I believe it's more like 3 to 5% of the people. But that's just quibbling over numbers. The point is, if we know that, why didn't we tax them? Why did we tax the same people who are least able to afford it? And here's what has been the result of that tax, Mr. Speaker. VAT has been a tax increase. Not, and I've said this before, not just a redesignation of existing taxes, a tax increase. VAT has been openly spoken about in this House as being projected at raising $300 million. I think it's actually going to raise more. And that is not a good statement. That's a bad statement because it will raise more on the backs of the people who are least able to afford it. And here's what went wrong. The government put out this book. And I'm not detracting from what I just said. In itself, it's a bad tax. And we should repeal it. But more than that, in the way in which it's been implemented, it's even a worse tax than was anticipated. This is the Bahamas Custom and Excise Department rate of duty booklet for VAT. It's been given out all over the place. And if you look in it, you see all of these little calculations to say if you imported this amount of goods, in one calculation you have $100 coming in and another $400 and a final one $10,000. And it shows you what the calculation would be and how much VAT you'd eventually pay. If you look at that carefully, you would notice that in the last item before they add VAT, they call that item total landed costs. Total landed costs. In the actual C-18A form, they called it landed costs. But what they mean there is that this is what you charge VAT on. VAT used to be charged, when we defined total landed costs previously, on the cost you pay overseas for something, plus insurance and freight. Now we have redefined total landed costs as including tax, including customs tax, excise tax, processing fees, and environmental levies. And then you charge VAT. And so the effect has been that you do not have a 7.5% tax on landed goods anymore. You have a 7.5% tax on those goods and a 7.5% tax on the tax which you were paying on those goods. And that's where the double taxation comes in. Let me give some simple examples. You take a bread basket item, which used to be 0. It's now 7.5%. Can't really claim their bread basket items anymore as a result of that. But take something that used to be custom dutiable, something that's now 35%. You take a 35% item, and there are many of them, such as cement, windows, PVC pipes, things that everyone buys. You would think that VAT is 7.5% of the cost of buying that, transporting it, and insuring it when you transport it. It's not. It's 7.5% plus 7.5% of the 35% customs duty. So VAT on those goods to this, in this day, at this moment in time, is 10.125%. Because you're taxing the goods and you're taxing the tax on the goods. Take something like 45% tax. Stoves, fridges, machines, furniture, things that we all buy. You would think the VAT is 7.5%, but it's 7.5 plus 7.5 of 45%. VAT is now 10.875% on those. It's actually worse than that, which I'll get to in a second. But on straight line calculations, on those it's 10.875%. Today, although we said it would be 7.5%, which was bad enough. Take an item like vehicles, something that we all deal with. Vehicles between up to $10,000. There's 65% customs duties. You would think VAT is 7.5%. It's 7.5 plus 5.1 because you have to do the 7.5 by itself and then the 7.5 on the 65%. VAT on the lowest value custom duty today is 12.6%. On custom duties on vehicles between $10,000 and $40,000, it's 13.125%. On vehicles of over $40,000 today, VAT is 13.875%, almost 14%. And so when we started off with 15, and then we say, oh, we're going to take it back to 7.5, which was still inequitable, in my opinion, we have in its essence, by one little definition, by saying landed cost includes the tax, pushed it back up again. And so for most people, today, VAT is actually between 10.12% and 13.875% today. And it actually is worse than that, because VAT is also a tax on income, on profit, sorry, because when the wholesaler brings in his goods, he doesn't sell it to you for what he got it for. He sells it to you including his profits. And when he sells it to you including his profits, there's a VAT on that sale price to you. Or let's use the classic scenario. Wholesaler to retailer, retailer to you. Wholesaler, when he sells to the retailer, he adds his profit in there. And when he does that, he adds VAT. And so it's not even the figures I've just given. It's a VAT on his profits. We finally have a tax on profits, and the profits of the wholesalers are being paid by the consumers. Wholesaler sells to retailer. There's another VAT on his profits. And all of that is bundled and sold to the consumer. And so the consumer is one paying the higher VAT, not 7.5%, but between 10.125 and 13.875, except for breadbasket items. And he's paying all of the profit tax for the wholesaler and the retailer. How in the world can that be conscionable or fair? Recently, the President of the United States, in his State of the Union address, addressed a concept which he called middle-class economics. I've been waiting for quite a while to hear someone say that. And what he is basically saying, he's debunking this Republican idea of trickle-down economics, which is that just let the rich make a lot more and crumbs will fall off their table and the other people will get the crumbs. He's debunking that idea. And of course, he's debunking the socialist idea that we just turn the country into a welfare state and keep giving out checks to people. And he's in the middle. He's saying, as every responsible economist in the world will admit, that the largest employer in every economy is not, every democratic economy, is not the government, and it's not the fancy hotels and so on. It is the aggregate of the middle class. It is when you put all the middle class together, all the little stores, the little gas station, the little tailor shop, the little business lady with her little restaurant, all of them together are the largest employer in the country. And what he is saying is that if you want to stimulate the economy, you stimulate the middle class. VAT does the opposite. It does the opposite. It actually allows the rich at the top to keep their money because they would only pay VAT if they spend their money on goods or services. It's not on their income, it's not on their gains, it's not on anything that they tend to keep for themselves. And so it doesn't apply to them. And for the poor, like my mother used to say, where you put me? It is a tax on the middle class. And is actually counterintuitive to those people who want to stimulate the economy and create more jobs, because jobs come from the middle class. That's where the bulk of the jobs came from. When we were in opposition and we were talking about the road works, we understood this concept. We said to the government of the day, which is now the opposition, that the roadworks in Nassau are destroying middle-class businesses. Whether we were right or wrong, that's not my debate. But my point is, we understood the role of the middle class and the impact of anything that hurts the middle class, of the impact of that on the economy. We understood. And suddenly we seem not to get that anymore. We have to cross over that Jordan. We have to cross over this idea of business as usual. And on this point, Mr. Speaker, I can only say it. When the people voted for a new generation of leaders, it was not the idea of new people doing the same old thing. New people with the same practices and the same excuses. It was the idea of new things, new ideas, a new way of governance for the betterment of the country. And I'm still waiting to see that. Let's talk about something else. Home foreclosures. It's a very easy one. Home foreclosures. We campaigned to a degree on that. We spoke to a degree on it. Not sure we were really sold with the idea. But again, this is the middle class. We are now in the process of seeing the most massive transfer of wealth that this independence Bahamas has ever seen. Demographic transfer of wealth, meaning from one class to the next, or in between a class, from one group of persons to the next. We have seen so many homes foreclosed upon, and we have done absolutely nothing about it. We've talked about it, we've come in here, we've said we've done things with the bank, one or two people might have been helped. We now have a bill, we've had it up to the second, I think the first reading have gone through, and we're supposed to keep debating it, and there is no urgency to it, and meanwhile people are losing their homes. And for the average person, I'm not talking about the super rich, and I'm not talking about the professionals and the politicians who have their own way of doing their things. For the average person, the greatest accumulation of wealth that they will ever accomplish in their lifetime will be the purchase of their home. That is a purchase that they will make over a period of 20-something years. They'll do it bit by bit, but it is the greatest accumulation of wealth they will have. And there's some implications to that. One, it is the greatest opportunity that they have to pass wealth from one generation to the next. And so when they lose their homes, they're not just losing their homes. They're losing all the savings that they've accumulated in that home, the equity, and they're losing the ability to pass it on to the next generation. I mean, that is a massive loss. And we understood this as the PLP in the beginning. We're the ones who spearheaded home ownership in the country. Our housing program was legendary. We're the ones who insisted that Bahamians have good-paying middle-class jobs so that they could buy their own homes, even outside of government housing programs. And the effect was incredible. And we are watching that being eroded yearly, monthly, weekly, daily. Anyone could pick up the newspapers at the end of every week and see absolutely nothing about it. And what is so difficult to do something about it? I've said in this House, as I said on the campaign trail, I've repeated in this House over and over and over and over again. The law we need to pass will not even fill one page. Not one page. And we don't need to draft it. It was already drafted by the British. It's Section 36 of the Administrative Justice Act, 1970. It's been in operation since 1970. Every major country in the world, every democratic country in the world that is serious about equity to their citizens has a version of this act. And it simply says, where a mortgagee, meaning someone who loaned money, under a mortgage of land, which consists or includes a dwelling house, means we're not talking about your land which you have your business on, we're not talking about your empty land, we're talking about your home, brings an action in which he claims possession of the mortgage house, the court may exercise certain powers. And the powers are stated very innocuously. Just the power to adjourn the hearing, to suspend the hearing, to postpone delivery, and so on. But a whole body of legal opinions, legal judgments have grown up around this. And what the judges have shown us is that that means that the judge will have various jurisdictions, including the jurisdiction to make the order, to refuse to delay the order, to extend repayment period, cancel certain provisions of the mortgage, which appear to be onerous, to capitalize arrears of interest so that you're not forever and ever trying to catch up on what you were not able to pay, and to allow repayment of arrears of interest over the remaining life of the mortgage, including the extended repayment period of the mortgage. What that means in simple language is today, you go to a bank, you have a mortgage, you run into some difficulties, which may or may not be of your making, but in this country in the last 10 years, roughly little under 10 years, with the economic crisis, particularly in Grand Bahama that we have had, it has not been of the people's making, but you have homes that people have been paying for for 8, 10, 15, 17. I've seen one for 19 years out of a 20-year mortgage. And under our present law, the bank, the insurance company, doesn't need the court's permission to sell your house. They just look at it, say you're behind for 3 months, they find a buyer and they sell it. And only if you do not leave the house, they then go to the court for permission to put you out. Court has no jurisdiction to not put you out unless you come up with the money. And so that's the end of the matter. Your house is sold, you're out. What I'm talking about here and what other countries do is say that such a bank or insurance company has no right to sell until they go to the court. They go, and they say this person is arrears and we want to sell. And at that point, the court then has some discretions. That totally changes the market, totally changes the law. Doesn't require a penny of expenditure by the government, and merely brings into practice what is good banking practice and fairness for the people who own homes. We're not talking about your car that you went and mortgaged. If it's gone, it's gone. We're talking about your home. And we have refused to pass it. Why? And so we're in a situation in which we know how to help the middle class, and that means the bulk of Bahamians, and we won't do it. And instead, we're putting more taxes on them. Where does this lead? You know, Mr. Speaker, a house is not just a house, you know. A house is also a home. Because there's not just a financial aspect to this, there's a social aspect to this. When people lose their homes, by and large, the families are traumatized by that. And very few marriages survive that intact. Very few families survive that unscarred. And so there's a social component to our failure to deal with this one issue. Why won't we do it? Here's the reality in our country. And again, both governments have done this. We have not, as governments, merely borrowed money overseas, which is what a responsible government should do. It shouldn't be in the business of borrowing domestic dollars. You should borrow, when you want to borrow for your capital expenditure, go on the open market overseas and borrow it in US dollars. And leave the Bahamian dollars here for Bahamians to be able to access. Because when the government walks into the commercial banks and is borrowing money at 7% or something around that, or at any percent, the commercial banks have no incentive to lend that money to us. Because they are the biggest customers, the biggest borrower in the country. And as a result, simple supply and demand. If the government is going to borrow it, and you want to borrow it, then you're going to pay to borrow it. That's what's happening. The other side of that same coin is that when we get to the point of needing to be able to say as a government, as a legislature, in this House, that this is the law we need to pass to protect the homeowners, we, in the back of our minds, have to also say, but hold on, this is going to hurt the bank, and we are the biggest customer for that bank, so how is this going to hurt us? And again, we are competing in terms of our interests with the very people that we're supposed to be representing. That's what's going on. When our public corporations are, by and large, constrained to invest their money only here in B-dollar investments, meaning in the banks, the bank then has the money and has that money which then lends on to the government. The public corporations, if we deal with the prime rate, which I keep talking about in this House, will lose interest because that is their source of revenue. But if they were able to invest overseas, they would invest like every other government entity in the world, internationally, and leave the domestic market to the domestic people. And when we go through a recession and have to adjust the rate of interest, the prime rate, to deal with in our economy to make sure it doesn't stagnate, we wouldn't have to worry about that, how that affects something like national insurance. Again, let us cross this Jordan, man. Let us get to the point where we leave these old ways of thinking. Politics is not mom and pop shop anymore. It is not that simple anymore. We are dealing with modern-day instruments. We are dealing with modern-day relationships. We have to move to better and bigger and better answers than we're proposing right now. And we have to be serious about knowing who it is that we're here to serve. Is it the chosen few or is it the country? I mean, think about work permits, Mr. Speaker. In the last government, before the last election, the former member for Marco City, who was a Minister of State for Finance, said openly that the government of the day had collected $64 million in work permit fees. And he saw that as something to brag about. And I label that blood money. Because what that, if you think about that, 64 million, not over 5 years, in 1 year, $64 million in work permit fees. Are you telling us that we have so many Bahamians who are unequipped for jobs and unable to discharge those jobs that we need to give that amount of work permits out? Or is it that the government sees work permit fees as a source of revenue? And when I say the government, I mean both. Still, government sees work permit fees as a source of revenue, which means that the government is competing with Bahamians for jobs. Because if we give you the job, we don't get any work permit fee, but if we give the foreign person the job, we do. Work permit fees cannot be a legitimate source of revenue for government. Absolutely can't. Not when to do so becomes a driving force for government. Because what you are basically saying when you do that is that we are competing with you for the revenue. We, the government, are competing with you, the people, for the revenue. We prefer to give this job to someone who will pay us a work permit fee than to see you get the job and get some money to raise your family. That is exactly what's going on. And the people, and see, we in this house, we believe the people are tone deaf, The people are not tone deaf. And that is why the people keep switching governments. The people hear, but the people fear. And I think they're right to fear, based on how things have gone so far. They fear that if they stand up and speak for themselves, they'll be victimized. But at the end of the day, the people are not foolish. They understand that there are jobs that they can do that they're not being given an opportunity to do. Why, for instance, in the Grand Bahama, in the shipyard, we have foreign people painting boats? You're really telling me Bahamians can't paint? And they're on work permits. And they're coming to the banks every Friday in droves with their money to send back home. And they're being given housing and transportation and food and airline tickets and living allowances. And our people cannot do that? This is what governance is about. It's about shaping the policies of the country for the betterment of the people. The people, not competing with the people. Shaping the policies of the country for the betterment of the people. Is this a country based on the rule of law, or is it a country based on the rule of politicians? What is it? Let me take that point a little further. I mentioned in this House the other day, in relation to taxi drivers and tour operators, the provisions of the Road Traffic Act. And if we are a country based on the rule of law, the provisions of the Act should apply. Openly apply, without controversy. And the provision of the Act says very clearly, when we define taxi cabs mean motor vehicles having a seating capacity for not more than 12 passengers, which stand or ply for hire, and which is driven by the owner or a person employed by the owner. I made this point before. This has no provision in it for a vehicle to be leased out, a taxi plate to be leased out to someone else. We understand that's a law. The Road Traffic Act says that.
Bring your voices down.
And yet it will.
Members, bring your voices down.
The truth may be uncomfortable, but it doesn't diminish the truth, the truthfulness of the truth. It may be uncomfortable, but it is nonetheless the truth. And so we know in an act passed by this Parliament that you cannot have a taxi cab remain a taxi cab if it is driven by someone other than the owner or someone hired by the owner. We know that you cannot have leases of taxi license plates. We have this said openly in Parliament, recorded in the Hansard, and makes absolutely no difference. We go to the definition of taxi, tour car. We know under the Road Traffic Act, tour car means a motor vehicle having a seating capacity of not more than 12 passengers. Not more than 12. Which carries passengers for hire or reward on sightseeing tours or on prearranged transfers, which is driven by the owner or by a person employed by the owner. We know that's the definition. So we know tour vehicles of more than 12 passenger seats are illegal. We know it. Nonetheless, we see them all over the road. It's stated in Parliament. No one does a thing about it. And we're surprised when other people believe that obeying the law is optional. When we go to section 69(1), we know it says that subject to the provision of this section, the controller of road traffic may revoke any taxi cab, livery, car license, or self-drive vehicle license on the ground that, among other things, it is not being operated in compliance with the Act. It's over 12 seats. It's being driven by someone else than the owner or someone hired by him. It's not being operated by within the regulations or the Act. It's illegal. We do absolutely nothing about it. And people are watching. Is it the rule of law or not? Let's cross this Jordan. Let's get to the point where we really are serious about laws. And if we, in this House, are not serious about our laws, if we do not protect and defend, to borrow a phrase from another country, our laws and our Constitution, then what do we expect the people outside of this House to do? How do we expect the people outside of this House to see our laws? One would assume that the powers that be, those who are charged with the enforcement of the Road Traffic Act, would deal with it. One assumes, and back to this middle-class economics that President Obama spoke about, that the greater good would prevail, even apart from the legal question. We see in there tour operators are allowed to operate for prearranged transfers. Why in the world is that allowed to be in there? Why haven't we repealed that yet? Why are we protecting a few operators with large buses at the expense of all of the taxi drivers in the country who want to feed their families? Small, middle-class families. Why? And how can we justify that? Tell you the way we tend to justify it is that if my government is in power and my government is allowing it, then I'm with my government, so I'm allowing it. How is that different than gang warfare? How is that different from the people who carve up the country and say, my color is this, my group says that, you're against it, so I'm siding with my group and I'm against you, whatever the consequences. How is that different? It can't be different. And how is our ignoring of the laws of this country providing a proper example to the people who are the lawless people in this country? How can we with good conscience call on anyone to obey the law? When we see the law, we are the lawmakers, and we see the infractions and we do absolutely nothing about it. This is no different than the debate on real property taxes. We know all the people who owe all kind of money. Life goes on. But the poor man goes in the food store and grabs 1 tin of corned beef to feed his family, and he's in jail. Cross this Jordan. This is not a responsible way to run a government. Mr. Speaker, we have spoken in this House a few times about a Freedom of Information Act. And the former government, the opposition now, passed one. And I've said repeatedly it really isn't worth the paper it's written on because it has so many exceptions in it that it's not something that we should take seriously. And we have said, various statements have been made by various ministers and so on, that we will eventually pass one. And one minister actually went so far as to say, we'll pass it in the fall of 2016, meaning a few months before the next election. Some other people have said, oh, it's very complicated to draft these things, and we ought to talk about this and so on. In 1999, the Commonwealth law ministers met in Trinidad and Tobago, and they recognized the importance of public access to official information, both in promoting transparency and accountable governance and encouraging the full participation of citizens in the democratic process. And as a result, they recommended to the heads of government at the CHOGM meeting in Durban, South Africa in 1999 the adoption of a Model Freedom of Information Act. Drafted. It makes perfect sense. It's promoted by the Commonwealth. It doesn't have all these funny little exceptions and reservations, these absolute loopholes that you build into it so people would feel they have it but they really don't. It promotes transparency. By doing that, addresses political corruption. 1999. That's 16 years ago. We still haven't passed it yet. And this is the real question again. Is it the rule of law or the rule of the politicians? Is it business as usual, where everyone sits on the bus and we just change the driver every 5 years and the game goes on, we spin the bottle one more time, spin it again? Or are we really about building a country? This is what we were elected for in 2012. And I'm speaking particularly to the new generation leaders. This is what we were elected for. We were elected to take our country to a higher level. We were elected to put governance back in the hands of the people. As Christ himself said, in order for me for you to increase, I must decrease. He said that about the Holy Spirit when he was leaving. In order for our people to increase, we must decrease. Government must become about regulations. And the rule of law must prevail in our land, not the rule of politicians. I always say to people, you know, what you should really do, and this is my view, and I'm unapologetic about it. Stop fearing your politicians. Stop worshiping your politicians. Stop trusting your politicians. Politics is not about trust. Politics is about accountability. And the party that comes to you and says it's a matter of trust, it's not true. What is a matter of accountability? If I have an employee, and I say to that employee, I'm hiring you to do this job. And I say, I've come back in a year. And they say, oh, no, trust me, man, I got this under control. I would not be satisfied with that. What I will say to them is, show me what you have done. That's no different than the parable of the talent in the Bible. You're given a job to do it. And at some point you get judged on it. Politics is not about trust. And to say that is not to say distrust people. I'm saying do not put your foundation on that. Politics is about accountability. It's about the power of the country being in the hands of the people. Absolute power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's still true today. And it's true for everyone. It's true for me. And either we return power to the people or we encourage corruption. There's no middle ground there. Freedom of Information Act is about being sure that the people can know what their government is doing. The people can have access to the information, and the politicians can be on their feet, be on guard, because they know people will see what they're doing. And for any government to be against a proper Freedom of Information Act is indirectly to be encouraging corruption. The Commonwealth has drafted one. This is not rocket science anymore. 1999, just pass it. A similar point when it comes to income tax. Income tax is not just a revenue tool, it's an anti-corruption tool. The biggest gangster in the United States, Al Capone, was not convicted for being a gangster. He was convicted for tax evasion. Because you couldn't find proof of his illegalities. But you could find proof that the money you found he had, he didn't declare, and you lock him up for that. This is the same thing we're dealing with politicians and other people in our community, in our country. I said a few words in this house the other day about the citizenship issue. And I just want to correct, I'm being, believe it or not, very restrained in what I'm saying on that. Because at some point, when it comes to a proper debate on that, I will say all I have to say on that. But let me just correct one thing in the public domain, which in newspapers have been saying and certain members of this House have been saying, that is just completely wrong. Let me just correct it and let the debate go where it goes, and at the appropriate time we'll have a full debate on it. I made some comments about Article 7 of the Constitution. And in respect of that, I talked about people being entitled to be registered. Some persons have referred to the Bahamas Nationality Act and this great discretion the executive has on who they can register. And when you look at the Bahamas Nationality Act, it's another Section 7 now, not Article 7 of the Constitution, Section 7 of the Nationality Act. To this day, if you look in our government publication, Section 7 of the Nationality Act lists all sorts of things that can be considered, 5 things that can be considered by the government in determining whether to grant registration or not. And it ends with this omnibus kind of provision. If for any other sufficient reason of public policy the minister is satisfied that it is not conducive to the public good, that the applicant should be a citizen of the Bahamas. That's that's a final statement on it under Section 7. And it's still in our law. You just go look at the Bahamas Nationality Act. What they ignore is that the Privy Council in 1979, in the Darcy-Ryan case, gave a declaration to this effect. A declaration that the final words of the proviso to Section 7 of the Bahamas Nationality Act, 1973, which I just read, are inconsistent with the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and are void. Void. That is no longer in the Bahamas Nationality Act. Why we continue to print it is a mystery to me. The Privy Council has already declared it to be void. There's no general discretion in any executive to deprive someone of their constitutional rights. The listed items, A through E, must be exercised in a way that is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. But that omnibus provision at the end, that general provision at the end, is void by declaration from 1979 issued by the Privy Council. Why the Law Reform Commission hasn't taken it out of the Act yet? Again, is this a country based on the rule of politicians or the rule of law? Are we going to cross over this Jordan or not? The people might be well advised, and by that I mean the newspapers, to check the law with someone who knows the law before you go commenting on the law. But again, that will come up at some point. But for present purposes, just pointing out, it is no longer in the Bahamas Nationality Act. It is void as being contrary to the Constitution itself from 1979. You know, Mr. Speaker, there's a tremendous prejudice in this country against persons of Haitian descent. We know it. We've kind of been brought up with it. And there are some prejudices that the two political parties use for election purposes. You know, we are famous in the olden days of putting roots on TV every time we're approaching an election. Just remind people, you know, white people are bad to black people, so don't vote for the F&M. And they're quite famous of saying, you know, these guys are a bunch of crooks and they're bad for business, and so don't vote for them. It's been a part of our political commentary for decades. What we cannot do, again, if we based our country on the rule of law, is to incite discrimination in our country. This is one of those areas on which politicians should be leading. I am harder on immigration than most people I know. My view, actually, is that if you come into our shore, we should grab you, we should incarcerate you, not just deport you, we should fingerprint you, and we should put you on a blacklist that you will never come into our country again. And we should send that message out to the entire world that if you try to come here illegally, you will never be allowed in legally. And so you get one shot at it. I'm extremely firm on immigration because immigration control is a way of controlling our borders, is a way of preserving our country for our people. Where I differ is the prejudiced way in which some of us define our people. You know, if we go into 8 Mile Rock and we look at the people who have Turks and Caicos Island descent, and we say we're going to trace that back and see if you all came under the Constitution or not. And all of you all who might have gotten these funny passports before we moved over to e-passports, you all getting deported. We'd have major problems. If we said that those people who did not come here before 69 or 73 or whatever is the convenient date, forgetting we all came, most of us came from Africa and were dropped at different places. If we said those who didn't come here, from here, whatever the operative date is in our mind, are not true Bahamians, then we have to actually say to ourselves that many of our best politicians and leaders in this country were never true Bahamians. And the prejudice we have is that we take one class, one origin, and we say we're better than them. How is that different from us going to South Florida and the people over there who happen to be the most ignorant and the most uneducated and economically deficient speak prejudiciously about us? How is that different? The easiest impulse in the world is to find someone to look down on and thereby to feel better about yourself. The easiest impulse. Victimhood, imposing victimhood on another person is the easiest thing to do. That is how Hitler got Germany to go along with what he did. Because he says, you know, World War I really decimated our country, but here's a common enemy. Here's a common object of our wrath. Let's deal with them. And before you know it, the government that you empower through discrimination turns that discrimination on you. At the end of the day, what our Constitution says, or what it doesn't say, is a matter of law to be interpreted by our courts after due process, and all persons who thereby are found to be entitled to citizenship should be granted it. And those who are not should not. But this is not something that is a matter of policy. This is not an executive decision. This is a matter of law. This is a third branch of our government. And for those people who are entitled to Bahamian citizenship, to be registered, we are talking about deporting Bahamians. We have to lead in this House. We have to lead toward building a better democracy and a better country, not to lead in prejudice and discrimination. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a few comments made in this House over the course of the debate about Grand Bahama, and tangentially about what is going on with a view to determining whether to extend or not extend the tax exemptions under the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. I just want to say a few words about that. Again, there will come a point for a more substantial debate, and I'm not trying to have a debate now. I'm just trying to inject a few words. In 1968, and the date is 21st September 1968, the headlines for the Nassau Guardian, 28th September 1968, 21st September 1968, is Port Authority sale is approved. Government gets sweeping concessions. Both sides agree to broad changes. Then it goes on to say the Bahamas government has given its approval to the sale of control of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, but only after obtaining sweeping concessions and a stronger voice in the government of the booming resort industrial complex, meaning Freeport. The concessions, as outlined in a statement issued yesterday by the Cabinet Office, means that the government will have the right to purchase a 7.5% equity interest in the Port Authority, that the Port Authority will relinquish much of its heretofore ironclad control in such areas as licensing, immigration, customs, land development. The statement confirmed that the concessions demanded by the government have been accepted by both the Port Authority, Benguet Consolidated, etc., a huge Filipino company, and that certain things have been done after that. The agreement itself is then in full listed at page, I think it's 5 of that Nassau Guardian, 21st September 1968. 7.5%. And as a result of that, the Port Authority owners of the day were allowed to sell their shares to a Filipino company. And in return, they gave control of the licensing procedure and some other procedures, including regulating the Grand Bahama Power Company now, to the government from 1968. That's not just some arcane thing in an old newspaper, you know. It's referred to in the report of the Royal Commission appointed on the recommendation of the Bahamas government to review the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. That was a Royal Commission that was appointed, I think, in 1971, 74 or 71. And in that report, in Volume 1, at page 48 and 49, it lists the correspondence between the Port Authority and the government. At page 50, paragraph 149, it makes this statement. As we see it, the Port Authority and Benguet, because of their own urgencies, elected and should accordingly be held bound by their election to proceed on the footing of the conditions specified by the government, so as to complete their agreed plan of reorganization within the time they stipulated. The Royal Commission recognized that that was binding. The agreement itself, although it's laid out in the provision of the Tribune that the Guardian I referred to, is also laid out in its entirety in Volume 2 of that report. The point I'm making is this. This great pretense that we've been going through for the last 40-something years, that the Port Authority controls the licensing procedure in Freeport, is a pretense. Any attempt to sell anything in Freeport has to be done within the authority of the law. As the law points out, we own the right to control licensing in the Port Authority and the regulation of power. And all of these things at the appropriate time will be gone into in more detail. Mr. Speaker, I'll end with this, because my time, I see, is expired. I mean, other people's time expired, and they kind of went on with it, but I'll end with this.
Remember, no time expired.
Let us
this debate.
Cross over this Jordan to bring to this country a proper respect for the rule of law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.